When a cloudburst strikes with such force as it did in Swabi, the first thing we witness is not just water rushing through the land, but human lives being torn apart in its wake. Behind every statistic we hear, whether it is about casualties, injuries, or displacement, there is a story, a family, and a community left in shock and despair. These are not simply numbers to be read out in reports. They are mothers who have lost children, fathers who have seen their lifelong work swept away in minutes, and children who suddenly find themselves without the comfort and safety of their homes. The human cost of this disaster goes far beyond what words can fully capture. It is pain etched into the faces of survivors, fear that lingers long after the sky is clear, and uncertainty about how to begin again when everything familiar has been taken away. The cloudburst has not only claimed precious lives, but has also shattered the livelihoods of countless people. Swabi, like many other parts of our country, depends heavily on agriculture. For generations, families have cultivated their land, relying on the rhythm of the seasons for sustenance and income. But when torrents of water ripped through fields, crops were destroyed, soil was washed away, and fertile lands were reduced to barren patches. What was once a source of pride and survival has now become a symbol of despair. Farmers who woke up each morning with hope of harvesting their crops now find themselves standing helplessly before ruined fields, unsure of how to provide for their families. It is not only the immediate damage that haunts them, but also the long shadow it casts over their future. With each seed lost, so too is a dream, a plan, a meal that can no longer be shared at the family table. For daily wage earners, shopkeepers, and small business owners, the devastation is equally cruel. Shops have been flooded, goods destroyed, and earnings for weeks, if not months, have been erased in the blink of an eye. Imagine the heartbreak of a shopkeeper who has spent years building a livelihood, carefully stocking shelves with the hope of serving his community, only to see it all vanish under the force of raging waters. The psychological blow is as heavy as the financial one. People are not only facing economic losses, but also a crushing sense of helplessness, wondering how to rebuild with little or no support. The children of Swabi are perhaps the most silent sufferers of this tragedy. Schools have been damaged or turned into temporary shelters, disrupting education and leaving young minds uncertain of when they can return to normalcy. For many of them, education is the only path to breaking the cycle of poverty, but in moments like these, that path becomes blurred and fragile. Children are forced to witness the suffering of their parents, the destruction of their homes, and the fear in their communities. These experiences leave scars that are not visible, but will be carried for years to come. Their laughter is subdued, their innocence shaken, and their futures put at risk. And while we reflect on these immediate impacts, we must also remember the health challenges that follow disasters of this scale: the destruction of clean water sources, the collapse of sanitation systems, and the exposure to the elements all create conditions ripe for disease. Families already weakened by loss and hunger now face the added threat of illness. Women, children, and the elderly are especially vulnerable, and without timely medical assistance, the suffering compounds. To lose one's home is devastating, but to lose one's health and dignity in the aftermath is even more cruel. What makes this tragedy even harder to bear is that for many, recovery feels out of reach. Families who were already living with limited means now face the burden of starting over from nothing. In moments like these, resilience is tested beyond measure. People cling to hope, to faith, and to the bonds of community that keep them going. But hope alone cannot rebuild homes, it cannot restore fields, and it cannot replace loved ones lost. What the people of Swabi need is not only compassion, but also concrete support that ensures they can stand on their own feet again, not merely survive from one day to the next. Every human being deserves safety, dignity, and a chance to live with security. The people of Swabi have faced the harshness of nature in its most unforgiving form, and they have paid with their lives and livelihoods. This is not just a local tragedy. It is a reminder to all of us of how vulnerable we are in the face of natural disasters, and how deeply interconnected human survival and human dignity are. When a community suffers like this, the responsibility does not fall on them alone. It is shared by all who value humanity. And so, as we think about the impact of this cloudburst, let us not reduce it to a passing headline. Let us remember the faces, the struggles, and the untold stories behind it. For in every tear shed in Swabi, there is a call for us to do better, to stand together, and to ensure that no community is left abandoned in the aftermath of disaster. The true cost of this cloudburst is measured not in numbers, but in human lives forever changed. When we look at the aftermath of the cloudburst in Swabi, it becomes painfully clear that the destruction did not stop at homes and fields alone. The very backbone of the region, the infrastructure that connects people, sustains livelihoods, and ensures basic needs, has been severely damaged. Roads that once carried children to schools, farmers to markets, and families to hospitals have either collapsed, washed away, or become so treacherous that they are nearly impassable. Where once there was movement, now there is isolation. People who relied on those routes for their daily lives are now cut off, trapped in their own villages, unable to reach the services and supplies they so desperately need. The simple act of traveling from one place to another has turned into a struggle, and this isolation magnifies the suffering of those already reeling from the disaster. Bridges, which serve as lifelines in connecting communities, have been among the hardest hit. In many areas, they no longer exist, swept away in the force of the surging water. Without these connections, families are separated, supplies cannot be transported, and rescue teams are delayed or even blocked entirely. Imagine for a moment what it feels like for a parent on one side of a river, knowing their child is stranded on the other and being unable to cross because the bridge they depended on is gone. That sense of helplessness is devastating, and it is a reality many families in Swabi are facing right now. Electricity, too, has not been spared. Power lines have been torn down, transformers damaged, and entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness. For days, many people have lived without electricity, unable to charge their phones, unable to preserve food, and unable to find even a small sense of comfort that light brings during the night. This loss is not just inconvenient, it is dangerous. Hospitals and clinics that depend on electricity for essential medical equipment face severe challenges. And families already struggling with loss are forced to endure nights filled with fear and uncertainty. In times of disaster, when communication and connection matter the most, the absence of electricity deepens the crisis. Communication networks themselves have been disrupted. Mobile towers damaged by the storm have left communities unable to contact their loved ones or call for help. The silence of a disconnected phone line is one of the most haunting consequences of this destruction. Families trying desperately to check on relatives or coordinate aid find themselves cut off, unable to share news or even their grief. Rescue teams trying to organize relief efforts face delays, as the breakdown of communication makes it nearly impossible to gather accurate information or prioritize the areas most in need. This isolation not only delays help, but also adds emotional pain to an already overwhelming tragedy. The damage has also exposed how fragile water and sanitation systems are in the face of natural disasters. Burst pipelines, damaged wells, and contaminated water sources have left many communities without safe drinking water. Families who survived the floods now face the risk of illness as they are forced to drink unsafe water or travel long distances in search of clean supplies. The lack of proper sanitation creates even greater dangers, with the potential for outbreaks of disease looming in the background. When people are already weakened by loss and hunger, such threats place an unbearable burden on them, on the fragile health system that is struggling to cope. Beyond the visible destruction, there are long-term consequences that communities must now confront, with markets closed, shops destroyed, and transportation routes blocked. Access to food and basic necessities has become a daily struggle. Prices rise when supply chains are disrupted, and the poorest families are often the ones who suffer most. Relief may trickle in from outside, but without functioning infrastructure, distributing that aid becomes nearly impossible. This creates a cycle of suffering where those in greatest need are often the last to receive help. In times of such overwhelming loss, infrastructure damage may seem less visible compared to the grief of losing loved ones or homes. Yet, it is the foundation upon which recovery depends. Without roads, bridges, electricity, communication, and water systems, even the strongest communities are left vulnerable, unable to begin the process of rebuilding their lives. Infrastructure is not simply about convenience. It is about survival, about ensuring that people have access to food, medical care, education, and hope for the future. The devastation in Swabi reminds us of how deeply human lives are tied to these systems. When they fail, everything else begins to collapse. Families may survive the floodwaters, but if they cannot reach hospitals, if they cannot access clean water, if they cannot communicate with the outside world, then survival becomes a daily struggle that continues long after the skies have cleared. These are not abstract challenges. They are lived realities for thousands of people right now. This disaster has shown us the fragility of the infrastructure we rely on and the urgent need to strengthen it for the future. We cannot change the force of nature, but we can change how prepared we are, how resilient our systems are, and how quickly we can restore them when they are damaged. For the people of Swabi, rebuilding infrastructure is not just about repairing what has been lost. It is about restoring dignity, security, and the possibility of a better tomorrow. The true test of our humanity lies not only in how we grieve with those who suffer, but in how we ensure that no community is left stranded in darkness and isolation when disaster strikes. When disaster strikes with the suddenness and ferocity of a cloudburst, the very first challenge that emerges is the urgent need for relief and rescue. In Swabi, this need became immediate and overwhelming, yet the ability to respond swiftly was severely hindered. The sheer scale of destruction meant that people were trapped in their homes, surrounded by floodwaters, calling desperately for help that could not always arrive in time. Families climbed onto rooftops, clutching children in their arms, praying to be seen and heard as hours turned into days. In the chaos of such moments, every passing second feels like a lifetime, and the cries of those waiting for rescue echo far longer than the floodwaters themselves. The terrain itself became one of the greatest obstacles. Roads had been washed away, bridges collapsed, and landslides blocked critical paths, making it nearly impossible for emergency teams to reach many of the worst-hit areas. In some cases, rescuers had to navigate treacherous waters in makeshift boats or risk their lives crossing unstable ground. This not only delayed relief, but also meant that vulnerable groups, the elderly, the sick, and children, were left in terrifying conditions, unsure whether help would ever arrive. The frustration of knowing that aid existed, but could not get through has left communities feeling abandoned, even when the intention to help was strong. Rescue workers themselves faced enormous challenges. With limited equipment, overstretched manpower, and inadequate resources, they were forced to make heartbreaking choices about who to save first. It is easy to speak of rescue in general terms, but on the ground, it often comes down to split-second decisions: which family to reach first, which area to prioritize, and how to move forward when time and resources run short. These decisions weigh heavily on the shoulders of those tasked with saving lives, and they reveal the urgent need for stronger disaster preparedness systems that ensure no one is left waiting in desperation. The relief process did not end with rescue. It extended into the long days that followed, when survivors needed food, clean water, shelter, and medical care. Yet here again, challenges arose. Supplies often struggled to make it into the areas where they were most needed. Trucks carrying food and water were delayed by blocked roads. Helicopters faced weather constraints, and distribution itself became a daunting task when thousands of people lined up, each one hungry, thirsty, and desperate. Tensions sometimes rose as resources dwindled, and the sense of inequality, some receiving aid while others did not, deepened the wounds of a community already in pain. Medical relief posed its own set of challenges. With clinics damaged and hospitals overwhelmed, treating the injured became a monumental task. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, but with limited medicines, no electricity in some areas, and a constant flow of patients, it was nearly impossible to meet the needs. Beyond physical injuries, there were also the hidden wounds of trauma. Children who could not sleep after the terror they had seen, mothers who trembled at every sound of rainfall, and fathers who carried guilt for being unable to protect their families. Relief in such times is not just about bandages and medicine. It is also about addressing the emotional scars that disasters leave behind. Shelter was another pressing concern. Entire neighborhoods had been destroyed, leaving families with nowhere to go. Schools and community halls were turned into temporary shelters, but overcrowding, lack of privacy, and poor sanitation made living conditions unbearable. People who once had the comfort of their own homes now found themselves sharing cramped spaces, uncertain about how long they would have to live this way. Relief agencies worked hard to provide tents and basic necessities, but the scale of need far outpaced the resources available. For many, even today, the journey back to stability feels distant and uncertain. What this tragedy has laid bare is the gap between the scale of disasters we now face and the systems we currently have in place to respond. Natural calamities of this magnitude are not new, yet each time they strike, we see the same cycle of delayed relief, overstretched rescuers, and communities left waiting far too long for the help they deserve. It is a reminder that compassion alone is not enough. Preparedness, planning, and investment in disaster management are equally essential. We cannot afford to be caught unprepared again, because the cost is paid in human lives and human suffering. The people of Swabi, despite their pain, have shown remarkable resilience. Neighbors helped neighbors, volunteers braved dangerous conditions to reach those stranded, and communities came together to share what little they had. Their spirit is inspiring, but we must ask ourselves, should they have had to bear this burden alone? Should survival in the aftermath of disaster depend so heavily on luck, chance, or the goodwill of strangers? The answer must be no. Relief and rescue should be swift, organized, and guaranteed for every citizen, no matter how remote their village or how difficult the circumstances. This is why the lessons of Swabi cannot be ignored. If we are to honor those who have suffered, we must commit ourselves to building systems that ensure when disaster comes again, as it surely will, our response is faster, stronger, and more effective. Because every life matters and no one should ever have to wait in vain for help to arrive. The strength of a nation is measured not in the disasters it faces, but in how it responds when its people cry out for help. As we reflect on the devastation caused by the cloudburst in Swabi, one truth becomes undeniable. This tragedy was not only about the force of nature, but also about our level of preparedness. The destruction has shown us that while natural disasters may be unavoidable, the scale of their impact can be managed if we have the right systems in place. Too often, we find ourselves reacting after the damage has already been done, scrambling to rescue, to provide relief, and to rebuild when what we truly need is a stronger commitment to prevention and long-term planning. Preparedness is not a luxury. Is a necessity that saves lives, safeguards communities, and reduces suffering. We must begin by acknowledging that climate patterns are shifting and extreme weather events like cloudbursts are becoming more frequent. Ignoring this reality only sets us up for greater losses in the future. Early warning systems capable of predicting heavy rainfall and alerting vulnerable communities in advance could make the difference between life and death. If families had even a few hours' notice, they could move to safer ground, protect essential belongings, and avoid being caught unaware. Yet in Swabi, warnings either did not reach people in time or were insufficient to spur action. This gap highlights the urgent need to invest in technology and communication networks that are reliable, far-reaching, and capable of reaching even the most remote villages. Preparedness begins with knowledge, and knowledge must be delivered swiftly to those whose lives depend on it. Beyond early warning, disaster management requires strong and well-coordinated systems that bring together government agencies, local authorities, community leaders, and humanitarian organizations. What we often see instead is fragmented efforts where each group works independently, leading to duplication in some areas and neglect in others. A truly effective response demands coordination, a chain of action where everyone knows their role, resources are distributed efficiently, and no community is overlooked. The people of Swabi deserve more than scattered relief. They deserve a system that ensures their safety is a priority from the very first moment danger arises. But preparedness is not just about responding to disasters. It is also about building resilience into the very fabric of our communities. Poorly planned settlements, fragile infrastructure, and unchecked deforestation all magnify the destructive power of floods and cloudbursts. When homes are built without proper planning, when drainage systems are inadequate, and when natural barriers such as forests are destroyed, the consequences of heavy rains become catastrophic. Rebuilding after disaster must therefore not mean recreating the same vulnerabilities. It must mean stronger, safer, and more sustainable development that considers the risks of tomorrow, not just the needs of today. For Swabi, this means thinking about where and how we build. It means reinforcing infrastructure so that roads and bridges can withstand extreme conditions, ensuring that schools and hospitals are constructed with resilience in mind, and investing in flood defenses that protect both people and farmlands. It means embracing sustainable urban planning that respects natural waterways and reduces the risks of flooding, rather than increasing them through unregulated development. Every rupee invested in resilience today saves many times that amount in the cost of recovery tomorrow. More importantly, it saves lives. Community education is another pillar of preparedness. Families must know what to do when disaster threatens, where to go, and how to protect themselves. In Swabi, many people were caught off guard, not because they lacked courage, but because they lacked information and training. Simple steps like identifying safe evacuation routes, preparing emergency kits, and practicing drills can dramatically improve survival rates. Knowledge empowers people to take action, and when communities are empowered, they become partners in their own protection rather than helpless victims. Preparedness also demands that we think about long-term support, not just short-term survival. When fields are destroyed and livelihoods shattered, families cannot rebuild without sustained assistance. Insurance schemes for farmers, financial safety nets for vulnerable households, and microcredit programs for small businesses can provide the stability people need to recover after disaster. Without such measures, recovery becomes a cycle of debt, poverty, and despair. By planning for the future, we ensure that communities not only survive disasters, but also have the means to thrive again afterward. None of this will be easy. It requires political will, financial investment, and the recognition that disaster management is not a temporary concern but a permanent responsibility. Yet the alternative, continuing as we have, waiting for disaster to strike and then rushing to respond, costs far more in human lives and economic loss and in emotional suffering. The people of Swabi have already paid too high a price for our lack of preparedness. Let their pain be the turning point that drives us to act with urgency and foresight. If we are to honor those who have suffered in this disaster, then we must ensure that their suffering was not in vain. We must build a future where early warnings are heard, where communities are prepared, where infrastructure is strong, and where recovery is not left to chance. Preparedness is not simply about preventing loss. It is about preserving dignity, protecting livelihoods, and giving people the confidence that when the skies darken, they will not face disaster alone. The real measure of progress is not in how we rebuild after tragedy, but in how well we prevent such tragedies from destroying lives in the first place.